We're trying this again because I was slouching the entire time when I shot it the first time, and it's just, you know, we can do better. Hi, I'm Delaney. If you're watching this, you probably already know who I am, but I read 271 books in 2024, and I'm here to talk about some of my favorites. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I'm going to talk about a lot, so I'm going to try to keep it short and not to be like an hour long, so we're going to go pretty fast, just so you know. Okay, so first we're going to talk about my favorite books that were published in 2024, that I read in 2024. So the first one is One of Our Kind by Nicola Yoon. I really liked this author's YA books when I was a teen, and so I was excited to pick up her adult debut. And the publisher describes it as Get Out meets Stepford Wives, which I think is accurate. And I think if I read more thrillers, this probably wouldn't have ended up on my top 10, but I don't, and I really liked it, and the twists were surprising to me, so there we go. Number 9 is Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. It's about generational trauma, art, seeking meaning. I read it a while ago, so I can't remember everything, but the prose style and the poignant reflections on death and martyrdom really stuck with me. Number 8 is one I don't have, which is I Cheerfully Refuse by Leif Enger. There's a lot of climate fiction in this video, a huge genre for me this year. This book is about a man who's living in the Great Lakes region in the near future after climate collapse, and there's beautiful descriptions of nature, and the relationships between the characters are really good, and it was kind of funny, and I really enjoyed it. Up next we've got Interesting Facts About Space by Emily Austen. Love books where you're inside the head of someone who is just so mentally ill. A lot of people did not seem to get this book. Her last book was really well received, but not this one. I found it engrossing and disturbing and also funny. The main character has extreme paranoia, and it's destroying all of her relationships. And it's a good reminder of how close most people are to going off that edge. Number 6 is The Housemates by Emma Copley Eisenberg, which I do not own or have. This is the last book I read in 2024, and I'm so glad I finished it in time because I loved it. A theme that is starting to emerge on this list is that I love literary fiction about art, and in this case, photography. I also really loved the parts about the Philadelphia queer housing scene, because I've experienced some similar things here in Portland, and it was just so good. Up next we've got The Extinction of Irena Rey by Jennifer Croft. One of my favorite books of 2023 was The Center by Ayesha Mansour Siddiqui, and it turns out that I just really like literary thrillers about translation. This is more of a mystery, but whatever. It's so good, and the fact that Jennifer Croft is primarily a translator added a lot of realism. There are also like these footnotes that are from the person translating this book in the world of the book. Anyway, it was just very good, and I really like these like complete worlds that authors create. Then we've got Fruit of the Dead by Rachel Lyon. This is a literary fiction retelling of the Persephone and Demeter myth from Greek myth, and it's set in modern day New York. I found this story of how a young woman could stumble her way into crazy circumstances and like just get in over her head really enthralling, and the character development over the course of the book is really good. I stayed up really late reading this, and I would recommend you do the same. That was the 4th book on this list. Then we've got 2 of my favorite nonfictions of the year. I'm going to talk about more nonfiction at the end of the video. I'm not very good at reviewing nonfiction, but these are books that have a really big impact on me. This is Native Nations by Kathleen Duvall. It's a history of indigenous peoples in the Americas that spans thousands of years, and I just got so much out of it. I learned so much. It has beautiful pictures, and maps, and I would highly recommend to anyone who lives in the Americas. And then we've got Who's Afraid of Gender by Judith Butler, number 2 on the list. This is another one I think that everyone should read. Judith Butler is, you know, sort of infamous for having this like really dense academic language that's hard to parse, but that's not at all the case here. They do a really good job of writing for a more popular audience, and they write from the perspective of being an academic focused on gender for many, many years, who's now facing this like culture war on gender. It's a great book to give to your mom, dissecting the like anti-intellectualism we're facing in the US right now, and also I would highly recommend the audiobook. They read it themselves and it's great. And then my number 1 book that was published in 2024 that I read in 2024, I do not have, sadly I need to buy it, was Intermezzo by Rooney. Big surprise, my most anticipated book of the year. It's also my favorite book. And I just, you know, I loved it, and I loved Ivan. I love the relationship between the brothers, and Sally Rooney writes romance like no one else. And I loved all the chess. The chess was great. And that's all I have to say about that. And then we're going to turn to my top 15 favorite fiction books I read this year that were not published in 2024. First, we've got Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This is a fairy fantasy romance book. One might even say romantasy. But Olivia Atwater knows how to pull it off. The main character is cursed, only has half a soul, which means that she has trouble navigating like social interactions and the world in general. And it has a magic system and a regency setting that is really well grounded in reality, and it just really worked for me. It's kind of a crossover YA adult, and yeah, would recommend. Number 14 I do not have with me, but it's the Assassin's Apprentice series by Robin Hobb. It's a really long, dense fantasy series. I've only read 4 books in it so far, but it's very complex, and I can't really say too much about it without giving away the first book. But it starts with Fitz, who's a bastard in a royal court who becomes a royal assassin under the tutelage of a mysterious figure. And I love the initial trilogy. I have only recently started the second trilogy, and the first book in that trilogy, called Golden Fool, is probably my favorite so far. Like, the characters are so well developed, and it's so fun to read their relationships now that you know them so well, which is something you only get like later in these kind of series. Next we've got Known as the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. I actually am talking about the whole series here, so Gideon the Ninth, Hera the Ninth, and Known as the Ninth. And I know everyone loves these books, and they're right. Like, this fantasy sci-fi series about gay necromancers, it just hits out of the park, and I can't wait for the last book, which will hopefully come out this year, 2025. And I know it's controversial among fans of the series, but I really liked Nona. The literary style and the way that the lore is developing really worked for me, and that makes me even more excited about the last book. Then 12 on this list is The Very Nice Box by Laura Blackett and Eve Gleichman. This is satirical literary fiction about a woman who works at a fictionalized company that resembles IKEA. I really liked the author's style. They also published another book this year that was pretty good as well. And I really related to the thought patterns of the protagonist, and it was just like very enjoyable, pretty funny, but also exploring like death and relationships between characters and like mourning relationships, things like that. Very good. Then next we've got 2. This is number 11 on the list, A Song for the Wild Built and A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers. You've probably heard about these before, they're very popular, but they are cozy sci-fi novellas that are about a future where humans have divorced themselves from technology and from these intelligent robots and live in a very small sliver of the earth now, and the robots care for this wild nature, and it's about the encounter between a human monk and a robot for the first time in hundreds of years, and it's just like very philosophical and they're very short reads. Like, it's a good afternoon of reading, I would say. And I loved them. The next thing I've got is, where did it go? Number 10, The Skin in Its Girl by Sarah Cypher. My first book club pick on this list. It's a literary magical realist novel about a Palestinian American girl who's born with blue skin. And shout out to my book club. We all loved it. It does all these reflections on intergenerational relationships and the Palestinian diaspora, and it was just very moving and excellent. Would highly recommend. Then next we've got Maame by Jessica George. This is about a Ghanaian British woman living in London who's caring for her father who has Parkinson's. It's about family expectations and her relationship with her parents, and then also the struggles of balancing romantic relationships, friendships, family relationships, work, and everything in your mid-20s. And it's very sad, but also hopeful and often funny, and I really enjoyed it. Then we've got Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, which is an incredible multi-generational story of a family that begins in pre-slave trade Ghana and then continues through time following generations until Jazz Age Harlem, and it follows like the parallel paths of this family. One branch of the family is sold into slavery, and then the other part of the family remains in Ghana. It'll stick with me for a long time. It was just amazing, and just beautifully written, heartbreaking, and you know, it's a very popular book. It got a lot of acclaim when it came out, but I would recommend to anyone. Then we've got Burnham Wood, which is put some of these over here. This is Burnham Wood, which is number 7 on the list, by Eleanor Catton. This is a climate fiction book set in New Zealand. It's about a group of radical activists who develop a relationship with a billionaire investor, and the fallout that comes when big money is involved in organizing. It's also an action thriller. There's also farming, like guerrilla farming. There's weird relationships between characters. It's just very good. It's also like very long, but I would highly recommend. We've got The God of Endings by Jacqueline Holland, number 6 on this list. This is a fantasy novel that features a woman vampire and follows her life over hundreds of years as she lives many different lives. The prose is incredible, and the book is just entrancing. I don't have a lot more to say, but I read this very, very fast. And I would highly recommend to anyone who's interested in vampires. Then we've got Saarland by River Solomon. This is a gothic horror book about a person who escapes from an extremist cult in the South led by a charismatic black man. I love the way it examined race and gender, and as well as human mycological relationships, and it was just so good and also kind of scary, but sometimes you just have to get over that. Number 4 on this list is Poor Things by Alistair Gray. Poor Things was one of my favorite films of 2023, so I wanted to check out the book it was based on, and I can't say too much, but it completely changed my perspective on the film. I would highly recommend to anyone who had any kind of strong opinion about the film, like positive or negative, or anyone interested in an epistolary novel that's heavily inspired by Frankenstein. It was just excellent, and yeah, would recommend. As I would all of these. Then we've got, where'd it go? Oh, right here. Number 3, Rouge by Mona Awad. This is another book club pick. I think it was our first book club pick of the year. And yeah, it follows a woman who's becoming indoctrinated into a beauty cult that her mother once belonged to as she's mourning her mother's death and like taking care of her mother's affairs. And as she gets deeper and deeper in, she starts to lose herself and her identity. And it's remarkable. It stuck with me so well because it was one of my first reads of the year. And Mona Awad's prose is just beautiful. She doesn't, like, no one else can write delirium like her, and I loved it so much. Number 2 I don't have, but it is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Holland, and I honestly don't want to tell you anything about it because the less you know the better, but it's an incredible philosophical exercise about life, death, survival, and the unknowable secrets of the universe. A lot of the synopses I've read lean way too hard on the gender aspect of it, which is part of it, but it's not my main takeaway from the book. And it's gorgeously written and at times horrific, and it made me think more than any other book I read this year. And then the final book, number 1, is Parable of the Sower by Olivia Butler. Of course, it's my favorite book of the year, like, of course. It's such an incredible dystopian tale, such rich characters, such well-developed ideas, and if you've read this but you haven't read the sequel, Parable of the Talents, I would say pick this up immediately, and if you haven't read this, pick this up immediately. It's so prescient and just incredible. So that's all my fiction picks. I have a couple more things I wanted to talk about. Firstly, some honorable mentions that I couldn't figure out how to fit into the list. I read some classics this year, which I couldn't compare to other things. But of course, Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, excellent. I've seen the movie a bunch of times, but I'd never read the book, and it is good, like they say. And then I also read Orlando by Virginia Woolf, highly recommend that. And then Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides, which I don't know if that's considered a classic, but it was very good. And then I also read all of Octavia Butler's books, and it seems appalling that I only fit one into the list, but I would just read the synopses of all of her books and then pick one that sounds most interesting to you because they're all good, and you'll get something out of every single one of them. And then it also seems silly not to mention that I read 24 books in Terry Pratchett's Discworld series, and I could make a whole video about that, but I love Discworld. And then I also wanted to mention my favorite YA books of the year, When the World Tips Over by Jandy Nelson, The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schurfer, and Patron Saints of Nothing by Randy Rebay. All excellent books, would highly recommend to adults or to teens, and if you're in a reading slump, reading YA is a great way to get out of it. And then I'll give you a brief overview of my favorite nonfiction reads of the year. I'm not very good at reviewing nonfiction, like I said, but these are all books that taught me something or that left a lasting impression on me. First is Palo Alto by Malcolm Harris. It's a history of Silicon Valley and Northern California in general, which is where I'm from, and the havoc that Stanford / the tech industry has wreaked on the Bay Area. I learned a lot about California history. And then we've got Necropolis by Catherine Oliverius, which is a history of yellow fever in antebellum New Orleans. It's very fascinating, very informative about how disease has impacted history in ways that we often ignore. Very interesting. And then we've got How to Save Babylon by Sophia Sinclair. This is a beautiful poetic memoir about a woman who escapes an abusive Rastafarian household, and I didn't know anything about Rastafarianism, and it's fascinating, it's beautiful, would recommend. Then I don't have it, but How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. It's a classic history text that does exactly what it says in the tin. I learned a lot. And then we've got Before We Were Trans by Kit Ham, which is an account of gender non-conforming people throughout history. Very fascinating. And then we've got Strong Female Character by Fern Brady, which is a memoir by a Scottish comedian who was on Taskmaster about her life with autism, and it's very funny and touching, and yeah, would recommend. And then we've got Everybody by Olivia Ling. which is an essay collection by one of my favorite essayists about the body, our personal relationships to it, as well as our body's effect on our position in society and relationship to the government, things like that. Touches on a lot of different topics. I would recommend any of Olivia Lyon's essay collections, and I really enjoyed this one. And then we've got Essayism by Brian Dillon, which is a short book of essays, about the form of the essay as a literary genre or form, and I found this very inspiring. I'm trying to write more, and this was very helpful for that. And that's pretty much it. I mean, it's a lot of books. I hope you got something out of this video, and, you know, maybe I'll be back at some point to talk about more books. Thank you for watching.